Hello, everyone. Welcome to Empathy by Design. I am Julie Johnson, and this podcast in particular, what I recorded with Karla Helbert, who is just an amazing and innovative healer when it comes to holding space for grief. She is the subject matter expert of grief, working with grief on a mind, body, and energetic lens. So I hope you bring in some curiosity with her. There's so much to learn from her. So, in our workshop coming up next weekend, June 28th, 2025, she's going to be sharing practices that will help you learn to work with, as we said it with my in the podcast yesterday, getting bigger around our grief. So, I hope you come and learn a little bit more from Karla about how to use yoga, philosophy, some of the chakra work, and some somatic work, similar but different from Sarit's from yesterday, on learning to intertwine the grief inside of your life. So I hope you come and join us June 28th. That would be next weekend, next Saturday. And come help us or come learn more about how we can do this work together. You can sign up in the app, okay, in the courses section or on the website in the drop-down menu for courses. It's going to be in the show notes here. So I hope you join us, and we will we'll, we'll go on with the show. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Empathy by Design. This is a podcast where we really talk about how we set up spaces and situations where we're thinking through empathy. Now, sometimes that means we're working through aspects of how we set up spaces. But today we're kind of looking at more about how we define, because, empathy by design. So there's a big emphasis when we're designing anything, designing space for healing, designing a technological system. There's a whole thing around the language we use and when things feel complex. So today we're going to be really focusing on the language of grief with Karla Helbert, who's here. And we're going to be talking about, the language of grief in the midst of meaning making, when we're trying to make meaning of uncertainty, and how we work with that. But first, if you hadn't heard from Karla, Karla's been, well, we are on a different podcast. This is our upgraded version of it. But Karla is a grief activist, a yoga therapist, and a licensed is it LPC? Is it licensed professional counselor? That's the P,
Yes,
right?
that's
Okay.
right.
I was about to say practical. I was like, that's not right. Professional. And Karla has written two books that I love, Yoga for Grief and Loss and The Chakras in Grief and Trauma. So both books are amazing. Highly recommend them. I recommend them all the time. So Karla, do you want to speak more about your work and before we start?
Well, I mean, I do so many things, it feels like all under the same umbrella, but
Oh,
I'm a yoga therapist, I'm a meditation teacher, I'm a yoga nidra guide, I mean, as you said, a psychotherapist, I'm a hypnotherapist. Um, but anyway, and the grief activist part, I call myself that because when you're an activist for anything, it's about raising consciousness around that thing. And we are getting slightly better, but we live in this culture of that's so grief aversive. And as my good friend Joanne Cacciatore calls it, this positive like happiness cult, which if you are not happy, then you need to figure out how to get there as soon as possible. And I think it's a disservice to humanity because so much of the human experience is not on the happy channel. There's so many things happen. And of course, living in the times that we're living in now, um, we're not always happy. There's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of worry and anxiety and uncertainty, and it's incredibly stressful. So it's hard to just be happy all the time. And there is a lot of grief in the world. And giving language to it is really important. And I'm sure we'll talk about this, but I also specialize in traumatic grief, which is where you have that intersection of trauma and grief. And a lot of times when people have trauma, period, with or without grief, we lose our ability to be able to name what we're feeling. Alexithymia, people have this like loss of ability to say the words. So being able to give language to it, an expression, even if it's not words or talking or writing, like finding ways of expressing what is happening helps to open up those energetic pathways. I mean, emotions are energy, although grief is more than just emotions. And I think when we can help that energy of grief to move, however it's showing up, then it opens up so many things so that we are able to speak about our experience. And but the primary thing when you're dealing with trauma at all is having safe places. So creating that safety is primary too before we can even start to give words to it.
Absolutely. And Karla, before we get into the weeds on things, Karla is going to be leading our end of month workshop on unpacking loss, where Sarit and her, who will be on next week, are going to kind of get into a circle, let's say, and just kind of talk through, different aspects of grief and practices to help make meaning around the very things you just talked about, around traumatic grief, disenfranchised grief, all the different kinds of loss, and what that looks like.
Yeah. And that too, the meaning making is also so personal and so
Mhm.
individual. I mean, in fact, there's research that shows when somebody else, an outside person, tries to tell you how to make meaning or make you make the meaning, it's very aversive experience. Like it needs to be organic and it needs to be from you and your experience. And in order to be able to do that, you have to be able first, I think, to explore your own experience and be with your own experience in grief and in trauma, which again brings up the idea of safety. Like you can't even begin to process or integrate your trauma if you don't feel safe. And I think that's also true of grief, even in the absence of trauma, because we live in such a culture that is so aversive to grief, which is a fear-based thing. Like if somebody has a loss, especially an intense and very scary loss, other people then get afraid of that because it reminds them that it can happen to them too. I did, and this is just my personal thing. It has come up a lot in the past many years, but it really bothers me when people say, I can't imagine. Oh, I just can't imagine that, Julie. Yes, you can. Like human beings can imagine almost anything. We have imagined galaxies far, far away that don't exist. We have imagined entire languages that nobody has ever spoken because they're fictional. And we've imagined so many things. It's that people don't want to imagine that. And I know it's not done on purpose, but that's the fear operating. Because if I start telling you about my most intense, horrific loss, you then, because we're humans, start to imagine what it would be for you. And then that means you have to go there in your own life. And that can be very, very scary. So people shut that down in their imagination. Oh, I can't imagine it because they don't want to see it or then experience the fear that comes along with that. So grieving people often do not feel safe. And so what that does when people say, I can't imagine it, it on some subtle level, sometimes it's recognized by the grieving person. Sometimes I think it just feels this way. So they then energetically feel it and they know I can't talk to this person because they can't hear what I have to say. So then therefore they're not a safe person. So it's finding and creating safe places.
Mhm.
Um, and so, which is interesting, it goes along with the empathy by design, like whether we're talking about a physical space or not. But the physical space is important too. Having places and spaces that feel restorative, that feel supportive, that is the beginning of a safe space.
Let's go with that. So, what does that look like for you in your practice?
Well, so we're not on camera, but Like I make sure,
We can be on
but we don't
camera.
need to be. But
Okay.
I happen to be in my office today, right? So I make sure that for me, I have a lot of really nice, cool art, but it's all in soothing colors, lots of greens and blues that, work with the human eye, that help us feel comfortable. The walls themselves are pretty neutral, and the color is coming from other things. I have a green velvet sofa, and I have lots of cushy pillows. I also have a Reiki table back there, and it's got, nice, soft, cozy blankets on it. The
Mhm.
lighting, I never turn on the overhead lights. And of course, this, I also work with lots of neurodivergent people, so I'm always thinking about like sensory stuff too. I keep not a lot of smells in here, because that can be problematic for people who have sensitive nervous systems, but the lighting, like I've got stained glass lamps, I've got salt lamps, just creating a soft, welcoming, nurturing, cocoon-like space, even though this is a really big room. Um,
Right.
and then I have a yoga space on the other side of that door, which again has similar kinds of art, but much wider space and, space on the walls. So to help people feel comfortable, and this is not a judgment on anybody else. I personally do not hang up all my degrees anywhere. Like I don't honestly even know where they are right now, because it doesn't look like a welcoming, homey place. It looks like an office. And I don't want it to look like an office. I want it to feel comfortable and welcoming. Oh, I've got loads of crystals all around too. So I mean, there's that. But um I think it's really important because I want people to feel comfortable. And that's the first part of safety is, you feel comfort, you don't feel discomfort. So, because, if you're in my office, you're going to be emotionally feeling discomfort. And, I'm helping people learn how to be with that. So the physical space, I want them to feel comfortable.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm in a somatic, I'm exploring somatics again from right now Liz Arch's trauma alchemy class right now. Highly recommended, by the way. She's a great teacher. Just wanted to say, like, she's a great teacher. But she was going over yesterday. She was going over the autonomic nervous system, which is funny because I was like, I think about it all the time. Like I'm not like, this is not new to me, but it was interesting hearing it again. And I was like, huh, yeah. And what you just said was um learning to live within that discomfort. And what do I need? Like I was thinking she was talking about exteroception, right? What's happening around us. Um, and I was like, wow, it really is interesting what you need extra when you were talking, what you need exteroceptively in order to be with inside or sense inside.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, because I mean, you can only take so much discomfort and pain. So if you're and if you are feeling safe outwardly, if you can see this is a safe space, there's no threatening things around, then you can start to then be more able. I'm not even saying you start to be calm on the inside, able to start to explore and be with what's happening internally.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. So, okay. So we're just kind of going around thinking through design. So, so when you have somebody who's kind of, or like where we're that exteroceptive piece, do you just stick with people sometimes in that exteroceptive space? Like being like, okay, we're going to be here in a sensory space, working with our senses while we slowly begin to move into whatever's happening inside. Do you kind of take a titrated perspective on that?
Well, sometimes it depends on what we're working on or working with. I mean, and for sure when I'm dealing with doing yoga work,
Yeah.
um, when we get centered, we're focusing on what's out there first.
Yeah.
I mean, the come to your senses exercises that
Right.
it's on the app is this checking out like visually what's going on around you, making sure you're safe. And then what can you hear far away? What can you hear close? What are you hearing inside? And what are
That's
you
what I was thinking.
feeling? Like the weight of your body? the temperature of the air. And then when you can know that that stuff feels okay
Yeah.
and notice what it is, then you can begin to attend to what's going on internally.
Yeah, because I was thinking of like this concept of titration, which is I was
Mhm.
in with Liz yesterday, and I was like, just I mean, these are all concepts that are I think about all the time, but it's just a different teacher and a different way of thinking about it in a different day and a different day of
Mhm.
Julie's life, you know. And so I think the senses are always interesting to me because, and I like your, by the way, if you're in the app, like go listen to Karla's thing, go listen to Karla's exercise. It's great. Um, because you were talking earlier about how our emotions are energy, right? And I was thinking about this herbal exercise that Karla also listened to that I gave to a client of mine who definitely just went through a traumatic loss. And I was like, and I went to herbs innately when I put that together because I was like, I haven't seen her in a while, but like I was told that she wanted to hear from me. So I was like,
Mhm.
God, I haven't heard from her in a while. I don't want to be like, hey, like, you know what I mean? Like, sorry, I showed up again after, you know, this horrible thing. So I just like made her some herbs, right? Because I was like, that seemed
That's
really,
really nice. I
really
love that.
appropriate. It's what I love about herbs though, because it reminded me of that sense. It was energy, right? It's like, okay, it's the
Mhm.
senses engage emotional energy. That's where I'm going with this. So do you sense that as well? Like that that's kind of like the first sense with the five senses. The five senses can kind of engage our emotional energy. Did not mean to be so woo, but here we are.
No, well, of course, of course. I mean, of course, but I mean,
Okay.
hopefully some of the listeners know, maybe some don't. We have way more than five senses.
Right.
The ones everybody knows about or talks about are those basic ones: seeing, hearing, touching, the tactile stuff, smell, and taste. But then we have the interoception and nociception, the perception of pain, the perception of heat and cold, our proprioception, our body and space, and all of those things. But then, of course, when we have the extra sensory perception, which people, it's not about paranormal, it is normal. It's just
Right.
something that we don't quite know how to measure yet, and this is my opinion, but I believe it's true. And then we talk about intuition. Everybody knows we have intuition. Everybody has experienced that thing of where it's like, oh, you're thinking about somebody and then they call you, or something pops up in your feed on them or whatever, and you're like, oh, I was just thinking about you. Of course you were. And energetically, and we can feel people's emotions. We can sense them intuitively. We may not always know that that's what we're picking up on. I mean, that's what empathy in humans is this ability to feel what another person is feeling. And that can be either cognitive empathy, where you're thinking about this must be how they feel, and really imagining, back to the imagining thing, this must be what that's like. And then there is the ability that many people have, most people have it to some degree, to feel what's another person's feeling. I mean, literally, all of us have come into a room where somebody's just had an argument, or there were words said, there's tension, and you walk in and you're like, oh, what's going on in here?
Right.
Everybody has felt that. And that is extra sensory. Like, that's stuff that it's your intuition, it's your picking up on energy. And people, it's a human experience. So
Absolutely.
that's going on all the time.
You know, it's really funny. While we were talking about this, literally, it's on par with what you just said. Okay, and it's hilarious. So I literally was like, oh, I didn't do a push notification on like a practice today. I was like, oh my God, I need to do that. I need to put that out in the app. Literally, I have no idea when this happened or how this happened because I was traveling to Detroit. Um, the grief practice thing that I put out, whether it's whatever it was something energetic. The thing I thought went out about inviting people to go into your grief exercise in the app literally just fired in the app while you were talking. That's all
That's
I'm saying.
funny. I mean, it's just so, but talking about grief. So when I do trainings, my definition of grief is the loss of something precious, and
Yeah,
the experiences we have when something precious to us is
right.
lost or gone.
Right.
And that's a pretty wide thing, but the experience of grief includes the physical experience, the mental, in the mind, what we tell ourselves, the cognitive, well, cognitive is separate from that. That's literally the functioning of your brain,
Right.
your attention ability, your ability to focus, your ability to plan things, all of this stuff gets affected. Word finding is a problem a lot of
Mm.
times. And so cognitive, emotional, mental, physical, energetic, intuitive, and spiritual. It is a global, human global experience. And depending on the intensity of that loss. I mean, I'm not even saying whether it's traumatic or not. It might not be a traumatic loss, but it could be an intense loss, like a person, like let's say you've been super close to your grandmother your whole life, and she was an incredibly important person in your life, and she dies the best possible death she can die. And there's no trauma involved, but that's a hugely intense loss for you because of
Right.
the deep connection that you have with her and your relationship itself. And there may be trauma in just loss of that relationship. It depends on the person because trauma is very individual, as grief
Right.
is very individual. So, and when we have clinical ways of measuring trauma, but ultimately somebody's trauma is their own trauma, and it's totally an individual experience. So it's this huge thing. But the intuitive piece of it, I experienced it myself, and I've talked to many people. It's hard to trust your intuition a lot of times when you have been impacted by grief, and a lot of your ability to even trust your own senses sometimes is hard. We have because you can be so impacted on the physical level, on the nervous system level, that you don't even know who you are or what's happening anymore. And so sometimes, like, feeling into those spaces in new ways, because one of the things that I've said, well, two things. I realized my son died of a brain tumor in 2006 and really early, and I was a therapist already, but when something like that happens, it changes everything. And I realized I have two main things to do and figure out how I have a relationship with somebody who's not here anymore on the physical plane, and then figure out who I am, because I am totally changed and I will never go back to being who I was before that happened. And you really truly, the trauma of it, impacts our nervous system hugely. I mean, trauma is a nervous system issue. Um, and so that was like figuring out, like, oh, I have all these new sensory experiences now, overwhelm, or, the ability to my hear the sounds were just so loud. I could not handle the intensity. If there was more than one thing happening, it was jangling to me. Like I just would feel like I'm about to lose my mind. I would just start yelling and run out of the room. Like I couldn't handle a lot of noise and sensory stimulation, which wasn't true before. So like learning how to manage that is huge. But then like the intuitive pieces, I felt I couldn't trust my intuition anymore. There's
Right.
just so many, and it's a spiritual crisis for sure. So learning how to like figure out the world when your belief system or deeply held ideas of who you've been and how the world is and the universe is totally changed, just shifts everything, and it affects you on all those levels. So it's a pretty life-changing experience for sure. And even though I would say I'm trauma recovered from that. Like the trauma has healed. The grief remains for sure, and my life is still almost 20 years later, still deeply impacted, forever changed. And I am not the same. I'm still not the same person I was. I'm very, very different. Even though a lot of on the outside, I think I may look more like people thought I was before, but I'm on the inside forever changed. And some of those things, I'm still coming to terms with. It's an ongoing process.
Yeah. It's interesting because I'm thinking of something my own therapist talked to me about. in terms of loss in general, about from like a sun moon. So I see an astropsychologist. This is getting super woo, but like just roll with me here.
I
Okay.
love an astropsychologist. I just think
Yeah,
that's awesome.
she's a licensed she is like she's like a legitimate therapist, just so you know. Like
Yeah,
she is
oh, I know. And she
but
knows astrology,
she
so
knows astrology, so we go through the attachment system through the stars, and it's been really life-changing. Highly recommend if you can find one that's
mhm,
like reputable.
mhm,
So good if that's where how you handle it things. But we started talking about the sun and the moon, and and gen gender or not. This is not gendered. So like take in my life it's gendered, but it may not be. It's energy, okay?
mhm.
But
Like
this,
yin and
yeah,
yang
it's yin and
energy.
yang. But when the sun person in your life, who would be like a father, let's say, or the moon in your the female, the moon in your life, okay, dies, a mother or father figure doesn't
Mm,
necessarily have to be. That's generally where we go with it, but you can have like a son mother figure, you know what I mean, who's your mom,
sure,
you know,
yeah,
identified as female, and like I mean that's how it is in my family. Like my husband's more of like the moon, and I'm more of like the sun for my kids. Like we've figured that out, so we have the opposite.
yeah.
But uh but we were talking about when you lose someone, the moon or the sun, you actually disorient yourself from the universe.
Mm,
That's and that like you have to learn to reorient yourself to the mind of the universe in terms of an astropsychological
mm.
perspective. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, but if you literally think about that in terms of the solar system,
Yeah, that's
the way that we revolve around the sun, so whoever
right.
that person is that you revolve around,
Right.
which for sure is your children, right?
Right.
So, and then the moon, like whoever revolves around you,
Right.
and then this, either of those things is gone. You
Right.
really do. Like if the sun disappeared, well, one, we would all die if the sun
Right.
disappeared today, but the huge shift, and it does feel like a plunge into darkness for sure. And you're,
Yeah.
well, and that just, that makes me think about Saint John of the Cross and the dark night of the soul, that
Right.
you are in this place where everything is dark and it makes no sense. And there's no light at the end of the tunnel that you can find. And nobody can tell you when it's how long you're going to be there, or, and all the mystics say that that's where you want to be if you want soul evolution. But I'll tell you right now, being in it sucks. And you're like, I want out of this place, but you can't get out. And there's nobody that can tell you when or how. And
Yeah.
everything that used to work for you on a spiritual level does not anymore. And you feel completely abandoned, literally like the sun has gone out. And it's that sense of complete separation from source.
Right.
And you just don't know how you're going to find your way through it.
Well, and that's what she like that's what you meant. Like you lose the light of day.
Yeah, that's
That
right.
that's what that was her reason. We were talking through it, and she was like, "Well, yeah, when you lose like a source of light or life, whether it's your children or a source or parent or someone that is a moon or a sun to you in your own internal world, then it's disorienting to how you
Hugely disorienting. Like you have to figure out how to, like you said, reorient. Like you don't even know what direction you're facing.
right,
And so you have to figure out how does this work now? And there's nobody, and this is again, I mean, I literally have had people come to me and say, tell me how long I'm going to have to go through this. And I just have to say, I cannot tell you that. I just can't. I'm really sorry. I wish I could. And tell me that there will be a place where I come out of this. I can't even tell them that, honestly. I hate that I can't, but I can't because it's so individual. And I mean, what I will say is I'm going to do everything I can to help you find your way through this. But the goal is really, I mean, the sun doesn't ever come back. A different sun can come back, something different can come back, but it's never going to be the same. And figuring out like how do you create a new way of being? And
right,
that comes from learning to trust yourself in these scary places, which is very hard to do. And then to know that you will survive it, which also is often hard to believe. It's like, how do you, I don't know. I'll go back I've read some things that I wrote like in the midst of it. And honestly, I don't know how I did it. I don't. I read the stuff and I'm just like, I don't know how I did that.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And it doesn't have to be the death of your child. I mean, because again, loss is so personal. It's so
Mm.
personal. And, I'm in a place now, like right before we hit record, we were talking about some other things. And like I said, if somebody comes in here and talks to me about whatever their grief is, I want to know more about their experience. Tell me what that's like for you. Tell me about what's happened. It's
Right.
it's a personal, very personal story. But again, we don't grieve anything that's not precious to us. So if you don't care about something, you're not going to grieve it if it's gone. So that is the primary thing about grief, but it can look so different for so many people, and everybody's history is different. There's so much, it's so individual. I mean, and we hear that all the time. It's individual, but it is unique as your fingerprint. And you have different your fingers, you have all these different fingers. And it's as unique as your fingerprint. And it changes and changes over time. But also the other thing that I try to help people to do is to learn how to be able to carry this thing. And to do that, like you have to be able to grow your emotional muscles to be able to move through it and know that you can carry it.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense, especially, yeah, especially when especially we were talking earlier today before we hit record about the different languages for grief. And you were talking a lot about like sometimes we don't know the difference between sadness, grief,
Oh
loss.
yeah. Yeah, because we were mentioning like collective grief and all sorts of different kinds of grief. And this is definitely a time to be grieving, and there's so much to grieve in our culture, that's for sure. And hopefully it hasn't all been lost yet, but how people experience their own story and their own individual sensory experiences, physical and that's so all of it is very individual. But I do think a lot of times, especially when we hear and read a lot of things online, that the idea of grief can sometimes be confused with sadness. And also because we live in very scary times, there's a lot of fear and confusion and instability and lack of information and uncertainty, and all those things are incredibly stressful. And when we don't know what's happening or what's going to happen, then there's a lot of fear involved. And so sometimes I think that idea around grief is maybe it's not always grief. And so this is why it needs to be an individual exploration, of what is that, what has been lost, and what's your story around it. And then we were also talking about, well, even earlier when we in this podcast, after we hit record, the safe spaces and finding safe spaces and safe places to talk about your experiences and your story, to learn more about it. Like maybe you ask yourself, well, is this grief? Like what has been lost? I mean, I had a long time ago, somebody emailed me and asked me, do you think you can grieve something that you never had? And I do think you can, because when we have hopes and dreams that then are shattered, that they're never going to happen, we can grieve that loss of those things for sure. I mean, and it might be something that was never concrete, but like it just immediately like came just talking about this right now. So much of what I grieve in terms of my child is all the stuff I'll never know.
Right.
Who he would have been, um, what his life would have been like. And that also holds true, when you have an idea of what and it's all varies in, intensity, but also by the person, and also how much you focus on and sort of like continue to what's the word I'm looking for? To stay with that same story. I mean, because the story can change.
Right.
But I think what makes that happen is exploring it and being open to new experiences, which can be hard to do. But still, like you can grieve that when somebody goes through a divorce and then the whole future of their relationship that they thought they were going to have, maybe, retirement together, grandchildren together, whatever, like that's all gone and it's never to be. And that is a huge loss. Or, even like other people in that divorce, like a family that
Right.
now you're not part of anymore. And that's real. So, but telling the stories and figuring out like what are my losses and how do I feel about it, and where are there other emotions involved, like because I know for sure like almost everybody that I work with who comes to see me with grief is also dealing with anxiety, and they're intertwined, but I really try to get them to change the language around that and call it fear. What is the fear? Like, what are we afraid of? Like, it's anxiety is fear, and it's
Totally.
always future based. So what is the fear? And that's also the experience in your nervous system. I mean, it can be a low stress response, or it can go all the way up to panic, but regardless, this is a fear response. And I really do work hard on getting people to change language around that, because I think we hear anxiety so much in our culture. I have an anxiety disorder. Well, my anxiety this, anxiety that. Well, really, it's about fear, and that really it's a much more core kind of feeling. I think anxiety, we can put it over here and it can feel distant from us, but fear is very personal,
Yeah.
and I think it gets people to look, and we don't like to do this. Who wants to look at what you're afraid of? You want that to stop. But I think especially when it's related to losses and it's related to trauma, we have to know we're safe in it. And when we're safe, then the fear will automatically start to decrease because your nervous system is calming down. And when you can feel safe in your body, then you're more likely to be able to explore what feels unsafe emotionally or mentally or spiritually or any other way. And so
Right.
that's why safety is the first focal point, but it's complex. And, I think in terms of just blanket statements about grief in our culture and in our society, it feels like it dilutes the power of grief sometimes, and I do think it gets confused with sadness. But in terms of an individual person, it's all about like, well, what is your story? Tell me what you're about. Or not just not me, but anybody that's a safe person, and maybe it's a group of people.
Mhm.
Maybe you have like a collective space where everybody can talk about together their experience, because there's a lot of shared experiences around losses now that are also hugely valid. And being able to have safe spaces to discuss those things, I think is crucial. And I know it can feel, especially right now, that there are fewer and fewer safe spaces. So finding out how can you create them for yourself, and maybe that means you literally create a space in your home or another safe space, and you invite one or two other people who are safe people, and y'all have your own collective story sharing and supportive. And because one of the things that's so hugely important in grief is having a non-judgmental, compassionate listening ear, where we're not telling somebody how to grieve or how to get over it or what they should do, or what something is not their fault or they shouldn't feel this or shouldn't feel that way, but just to listen to their experience. And that's
Mhm.
where true empathy comes in too. Like, don't tell somebody else how they're supposed to feel, just hear what they actually are feeling. And you can do that when you can find your own way to create safe spaces with people you trust.
Yeah.
And I don't
No.
mean to suggest that it can be simple, because I know that can be very hard for some people. But I think it can be done.
Yeah.
And
No, I think.
even, just like our online space here, like in the Integrate app, you know, online spaces can be safer places.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the reasons why. There was a lot of reasons why we created it, but that's what was one of the reasons why we went with it, was because of those things. It's like, well, like what's space? Well, space can be space with myself with my phone. If I'm gonna be on here and I'm gonna be doing things, then like why don't we have some somatic practices that are easy with people we trust, to help create that space within me, you
Mhm.
know? So I can be my own safe space to a certain degree, you know?
Yes.
And you start to move, externally hopefully find to orient towards external safe situations or people or nature or whatever. It may not be people, it may be a plant. My daughter, we travel with our animals because my daughter feels safe with our animals. We will never probably ever fly anywhere again, but like for a while. So we have a chinchilla and a guinea pig traveling with us now. So
Oh,
because that's my daughter's safe space. So, but it is. That's why we drove to Detroit. I was like, we could have just flown, but I was like, but guinea pigs and, chinchillas probably aren't going to be on a plane, but like, that's how.
I bet they could be on a plane though.
Yeah, maybe. I was like, I just really feel like fighting. Then I was like, it's okay. It's like 7 hours away. We can figure it out. But things like that. But yeah, I like that you're talking about, how to do that because I think right now I even have to deal with myself like with all the junk happening around us, it's a lot. It's a lot and it's important and it's also a lot. So I call it junk. It's not like it's unimportant. It's just that like
Hmm.
it's a lot of energy at one time. And I think that it can feel, even inside of myself, I was noticing this inside of me today. I was like, God, I really need to like sit down and orient to a space of, I call it presence for me, but like, because it doesn't always feel calm inside of myself. So like a space of presence.
I
So I
like that.
can orient to whatever else the next thing is I need to do. You know what I mean? Or whatever,
Mhm.
And I was just thinking of how hard it was for me to like, as I was tired and I was like out in a new space I was in because I'm out of town right now and I had to like orient and orient and orient, to like where's the tea shop because I needed herbs. I needed to go like ask 4 people to be like, what herbal shop should I go to get this herb? And then I was like 15 minutes from like our Airbnb. So there was like a ton of orienting I was doing externally. And then like in myself, I was like, wow, I feel a little discombobulated from that process. And now I'm like, okay, I need to like go find presence
Mhm.
within. But I was thinking about how like I was noticing like my not even fear, but like my actual anxiety was like ramped
Yeah,
up.
sure.
And I was like, why do I feel like that? I was like, look at how many processes your nervous system just went through, like subconsciously.
Yes. Well, see, that's that self-reflective piece. I mean, I'm not saying nobody can ever use the word anxiety and
Right,
nobody ever has to use like my language for
right,
theirs.
right,
Um, but when you're able to look at it and reflect on it,
right,
you can see, oh, because we can have something truly that makes total sense that we are afraid of that. Or
right.
you can also have an external thing acting on your nervous system that's like stimulating a fear response,
Yeah,
stress response, and you're like, I'm not scared of anything. Right? And there's nothing that I need to be afraid of truly right now. Like this is just overstimulation, not just, but overstimulation. And it's a nervous system response to all the things that are going on around me. I'm actually okay if I can just orient and calm my nervous system down. Like, what do I need for that? But that's
right,
that's that's even more reason of being able to like look at it and not try to just push it away.
right.
I don't even remember who I was talking to today, or maybe I wrote this down in an email. I don't remember, but I did say to people, we're talking about the cognitive behavior therapy, which to me, like a lot of times just feels like gaslighting yourself. But and then when we talk about coping skills, it's more distraction skills.
Right.
And distraction often will have its place for sure.
Yeah.
But I am not a big distraction skill teacher. Like I'm like, let's deal with the discomfort first. Because when you can do what you just did today and say, okay, there's not anything really going on mentally or emotionally, or there's not a threat. It's all this stuff that my nervous system has been assaulted with.
Right.
And you wouldn't know that if you were just like, I don't want to feel this way. Let me distract.
Right.
So you get, wisdom in that way and also trust in yourself and then strength in yourself to know that you can move through these times when they show up. And they may always look a little bit different.
Yeah. And it's interesting you say that because we were talking about the senses. And I know for me, like that's actually how I got into herbs is I was dealing with a lot of really crazy things in my life happening. And I was like, herbs just make a lot of sense right now. Like they just make a lot of sense. And I don't know why I ended up doing it, but now it makes a lot of sense now that I'm 2.5 years and graduated from a program, like I was like, oh, that makes sense. Like they were able, because I can get them on a physical level. I don't think about it too often, but then later on I'm like, oh yeah, that's like what it was on the more the psycho-spiritual level. Like I went for that herb. You know what I mean? And I was like, it turns
Yeah.
out like, that's an herb like from like more of the, psycho-spiritual aspects of herbs, that actually needed. And that's like kind of a cool intuitive practice that I go through for myself when I'm in there. I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna go for cleavers. And I'm like, oh, actually it helps with blah 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 blah, like on a different level. And I don't know about it till later, but it's kind of cool that
Mhm.
I like that. That's one of, I mean, I got into herbs because it just felt instinctively right to study at the time to deal with some very complex issues that I was going through. And and I'm glad I did that because now I use it to orient myself towards people who like I spoke earlier, who I don't have language with, I haven't been in a relationship with day to day or regularly in a while, but it's like it's still that like, hey, here's a sense that I know you can make some sensory that can support you on all these different levels, regardless of where you are at the time.
Well, I mean, that's what I found, and I am not certified in herbs or essential oils, but I've used them for years and years and years and have worked with teachers. But when I was writing the chakras in grief and trauma, and for each chakra, there's each chapter is a chakra, and there's a narrative on certainly not exhaustive, but how that chakra can be impacted in trauma and in grief. And
Yeah.
then there's the sections on yoga posture, like asanas and mudras, the hand gestures you can use, and journaling and art prompts and stuff like this. And there's also crystals that you can use and stones with each one, but there's an essential oil thing. But it doesn't have to be the essential oil because the essential oils come from plants and you can just use the plants. But what I found when I was writing that section is that the things that they help you with on a physical level mirror what they do on a psychological, emotional, and spiritual level. It's really interesting. And the place that the one that is like so clear is like stuff that helps your throat chakra
Yeah.
because it's stuff we all know about, like eucalyptus.
Yeah.
Thinking about what eucalyptus does when you are congested and you can't breathe, or your chest is all congested and your throat is hurting, the eucalyptus opens up those passages. Well, that's the same thing it does emotionally and spiritually. It helps to open congested spiritual and emotional spaces. Like it's like, oh my God, it's really beautiful how these things
Yeah.
work. And
Yeah.
it is intuitive, like you said. Because a lot of times if you feel like I mean, I know for me, for the longest time, I didn't like I won't say I didn't like, I was averse to rosemary.
Right.
And then really it was on just coming back to that dark night of the soul thing. It was the first time in probably, well, I won't say exactly how many years, but several years that I wanted to deal with anything spiritual. And somebody invited me to an herb and essential oil workshop for therapists.
Mm.
And the first thing that they did is say, okay, you just randomly choose. And it's a deck of cards actually, that's herb cards on the cards, and you pull a card that is the one you need to work with over the weekend. And the one I pulled out is rosemary. And I was like, I don't want rosemary.
Right.
But what I needed was remembrance. And like Shakespeare said it, Rosemary, well, Ophelia said it, rosemary is for remembrance. But all the other things that rosemary does is exactly what I needed, like the strength of spirit, and it's so invigorating. And I needed invigoration, and I needed that conscious remembrance.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting. And then ever since that, I love rosemary. Like I can't get enough. I think it's beautiful. I grow lots of rosemary and I put it in fresh rosemary and things that I cook and in salad dressings. And I'll just go out sometimes and just like, stroke the rosemary. I don't even know what you call that. But you know how they are long and
Yeah.
stemmy, and I'll just then like rub it all over my hair and my shirt and just walk around smelling like rosemary all day. Like I
Oh,
just think it's beautiful. But for the longest time, I was like, I can't stand it. And so I think like is when you're ready to open to a certain plant and an herb, it shifts everything.
it really does. And I'm always like looking at, we look at patterns, and when I see a pattern of an herb showing up in my life, you know what I mean? I'm always like, okay, like maybe we need to go deeper into that plant a little bit. You know what I mean? Like when I
Mhm.
see that, like dandelions right now are very in my world at the moment, like
Mhm.
because they're like the herb that like grows through concrete, which seems collectively relevant at the moment. Um,
Yes.
you know, and they're also really good for your digestive system too, so your
Mhm.
power center. So it's so funny
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
they show up. Like, so my right now is dandelions, and I've been like, okay, I need to get some dandelion root next time I go, like when I get home, and stuff like that. So I was like, okay, dandelions, yeah, that makes like a lot of sense. Like, it's note to self, like get some dandelion root, tea when you're out and about, Julie, and pay attention to. And that's one thing I love. Not to nerd out on herbs. This is not exact, like, sorry to like, but it's important with what we're saying is I think also as and more of an energetic herbal practitioner, something that one of my teachers talks about, which I think is interesting with grief, about the simplicity of things. It's just relevant, sensory relevance to
Yes.
exploration that I really like. Is sometimes like for me, when I was going through herbs at first, and even my herbal teacher, she loves to pile on the senses. I cannot stand making her formulations. I do them, but like it was too much for it's too much for my senses. Like I was like, I need to like, there's like 12 in here and I need like two, you know?
Well, I mean, personally, I think because they're so powerful anyway.
Right.
Less is always more.
Right. And so she wants us to like, she wanted us to like make her formulations, and stuff like that. And I did it. And I like didn't love making them mostly because it overwhelmed my senses. But then my other teacher, who I'm more in alignment with, Sage Popham, he was like, you should do one thing at a time. You should do one at a time and explore your relationship and your shifting nervous system experience with each plant. Now that's my jam right there.
Well, I think that just makes total sense.
I
You
knew
know,
you would. That's why I said it.
if you do multiple things like that, I mean, and it just popped into my mind, like the thing about psychopharmacology, um, which we won't talk a lot about, but one thing that has always bothered me, and I'm not a doctor, but when prescribers change multiple things in somebody's medication, like
Right.
they'll increase a dosage of one thing and then change something else, and then, well, we'll up this one. How do you know what's having an effect
Right.
if you change multiple things at once?
Right.
Like why would you not just do one thing? Because I don't care how much you think you know about a medicine,
Right.
this person's body and their system and their brain and their individual chemistry is like nobody else's. So you cannot know how it's going to affect them. But if you just do one thing,
Mhm.
then you're going to know, or at least have a much better idea of, oh, well, this is what we changed. Then we now know how this affects this person. If you do all kind of cocktail of stuff and make all sorts of shifts, then how do you know? Like
Right.
it makes
No,
no sense to me.
it is. And that's why I tend to practice more of like we call it the vitalist, perspective on herbs in that now I'll make blends and blends are really good for as gifts and I'll give them as gifts. But when it comes to like my relationship with like a really psycho spiritual situation or something like that where we're like I'm like, well, I don't know, I know what cleavers does for me because I went like a month just doing that, drinking cleavers, you know what I mean, and like I can spot it, you can like look at it, that when you're in the ground and it becomes kind of this cool, like when you really sit with a plant. I didn't know I was going to nerd out on plants in this podcast. um but
Every time you and I talk to each other, this happens.
but like but it goes back to grief, right?
Yeah.
Because when you can learn to build a relationship with a plant and you're feeling alone in the world, right? And you start to realize that plants are connected to people, okay? And they mirror you, and then you get to see them in nature, and there's this sense kind of talking about reorienting. This is my personal experience, reorienting back to the world after some sort of sadness, or for me it was loss. um it's a way of reorienting back to something different for me, when you really condense it down to one thing, you can start to sense the pattern of the herbs around you,
Mhm.
and inside of you.
Well, we can just even extrapolate that whole thing just to nature in general.
Yeah.
Because getting grounded and finding your like working with one plant or going out into the woods and sitting with one tree and
Oh yeah.
just feeling the energy, it helps you get grounded. And that is really huge for for the sense of safety in your nervous system. But it also helps you to remember that you are part of something bigger and you do belong,
Yeah.
and this is, you're part of nature. You're
Yeah.
part of this like interconnected world.
Right.
And because when you're in a space of trauma and grief, you feel like you're not connected to anything. And
Exactly.
that doesn't necessarily take away the sense of separation from the thing that you've lost or the person that you've lost, but it can bring some comfort in knowing that I can connect with this tree. I
Yeah.
am part of the earth, which is holding me up.
Right.
And that is safety and security. And when you can even find, just a moment of that sense, it's helpful.
It really is. It really is. And yeah, so anyway, if you're interested in kind of that perspective, Sage Popham's book, Evolutionary Herbalism, so good. That's what he teaches, is like sort of moving into those plants in those little significant spaces. But it is very cool to do that. So, okay, so Karla, so we have a with Sarit, who's going to be on next week. We have a we're doing unpacking grief, a conversation on loss. And we're going to be kind of going through, how practices conversations around loss and how we essentially a conversation we just had here plus Sari, who's awesome and brings in really great
Mhm.
insights on the nervous system and depending on how the world is, which is sometimes people show up live, sometimes they don't, so it's great if they do, but I also we program for for asynchronous as well. We always are welcome to listen to other people's
Yeah.
questions as well, so it could because of safety, right? Like,
Mhm.
and that is one thing I've realized as we've been going through, and I've done with you lots of different seasons of the collective, and it's always in, how we show up with these things, but we always have both options. So we'll have a recording and we'll have it live. So if you show up live, we'll practice with you. If not, we'll practice with each other. And
Gonna be great.
yeah, it's awesome. Well, thanks a lot, Karla. And like I said, go check out Karla's books to kind of go deeper into all of her somatics, energetics, and emotional reflections of grief. It's great books. Are you
Oh,
doing good?
I'll also say, like, there's the third, well, actually, it was the first book that I wrote. So I have three books that are out right now. And the first one that I wrote was Finding Your Own Way to Grieve, a
Yes.
creative activity workbook for kids and teens on the autism spectrum, but really is for everybody. It's not just for kids and teens or necessarily for people on the spectrum, but you will learn some things about autism, which I think everybody should know. But that book is really helpful too. Very concrete,
Yeah.
very easy to read and understand. And it has like a lot of activities and some somatic work in it too, because it can be really hard for neurodivergent people to like know what their feelings even are, so there's a lot of different exercises and ways of naming and experiencing and expressing those things.
Yeah.
So I love that book. It was the first one that I wrote, and I love the other two as well. But and then the one I'm working on now is about our continuing relationship with our beloved dead and growing those relationships because it's so important.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. I can't wait to hear how about that one. That one's definitely next level Karla. Like the next because I've been watching your career. That is definitely where you're at. So, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Karla, and thanks for coming. And
Thank you.
see you on the 28th. All right.
Yes. Yep.
Where the fuck is the recording? There it is. Sorry.